Great. So going on to the next slide, this describes a paper you wrote after that patent.
This is not, no, this is Toshiba.
Yes,
Oh, excuse me. I'm
yes.
sorry. I didn't look at the header. Pardon me. Pardon me.
It's my cue
Right.
to come back
That's
online.
your cue. Pardon me. Jump
So,
ahead.
also working on non-volatile memories at the time was a young engineer at Toshiba, Fujio Matsuoka. Later he did invent the NAND flash, and we'll get that in a later slide. But back in the 70s, he also wrote an E-squared paper. But that company also never produced anything about it. His was a double stacked thing, and I believe it was meant to go at a faster programming rate. But again, they never built it, so we don't know. And he did it with thicker oxides.
Right, the 2,000 angstroms compared to 90 to 100 angstroms.
Yeah.
Critical difference there. Yeah.
Right.
Right. And then on to the next one. This is the one who was like, here's the one back to you, Ellie.
So this is the work that actually I'm most proud of this in my entire career. This is really good physics. It was a work that I did at Hughes, and they were really fantastic in allowing me to build all kinds of thin oxides through all kind of thermal oxidation, anneal, any kind of conditions. And out of that, to characterize those films, I had over 10,000 samples that we built. Most of this with just capacitors, floating gate capacitors, because they were very quick, very easy to do, and flat band voltage shifts is good enough. I discovered basically that I created a new kind of way to characterize those films, which is basically a constant current stress. You basically pass current through the Fowler-Norton tunneling current through the dielectric. As you start trapping charge, you increase the voltage in order to maintain a constant current until you break down. And breakdown is inevitable, with SiO2 at least. And out of that technique, I could measure what I call QBD, the total amount of charge trapped in the oxide at breakdown. BD is breakdown, and TBD, the time to break down at a given field stress condition. And that was basically two parameters, two metrics that really showed that thin oxides were very reproducible, very reliable. Of course, you had to have clean interfaces, and I'm sure you'll talk some more about the interfaces, but that they were actually manufacturable, and I think that I published this in a Journal of Applied Physics paper. It was about 15 pages long. It covered immense amount of experimentation at temperatures all the way down to very, very cold temperature, liquid nitrogen temperatures, 250 degrees centigrade on the other hand. And it showed very conclusively that this was manufacturable, reliable, but that you could not achieve infinite number of cycles. That endurance was a fundamental limitation, because eventually, as you trapped more and more charge, the oxide would break down, which I believe is silicon-oxygen bonds breaking under very high internal electric fields. And that came in later on in my career, because when you got to solid-state storage, I knew that I needed to do something to overcome that endurance. It was a fundamental physics limitation, and the physics was very clear. But anyway, I think this is a pretty seminal work that I'm very, very proud of.
I had the pleasure to have worked with Ellie on an IEEE milestone that was dedicated 3 years ago, honoring this specific work, because it is the basis of flash memory. It's the basis of successful floating gate-based data storage throughout the world. And so there's 2 sentences in the citation on this plaque. And this plaque, by the way, IEEE milestones are meant to honor either an invention or a location, or an event. An example of an event is like the first ARPANET transmission from UCLA to SRI. An example of a location is like Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. An example of an invention is this. So anyway, so I worked closely with Ellie on this and learned a lot in this process. But if you look at the two sentences, the first one is the work he did from 76 to 78, which is what he just discussed, talking about the practicality, reliability, manufacturability, and endurance of the floating gate EEPROM. So that is the basis for a successful EEPROM as well as the basis for flash memory. And it's described as an electrically erasable device with a thin gate oxide, remember that 90 to 100 angstroms, and Fowler-Nordheim tunneling for writing and erasing. So that was proven in that time frame. And then this provided what's called a significant foundation of data storage and flash memory for new classes of portable computing. Basically, the whole idea of data storage and flash memory as opposed to code, because EEPROMs and EEPROMs were initially used for code storage. But the whole idea of putting data in them was a whole other concept. And we'll be getting into that more later in this presentation. But anyway, I'm really proud of this. I worked with Ellie on this, learned a lot about this. So you can see it's really incredibly foundational for all of non-volatile memory, virtually all of non-volatile memory in the world today.